muted here. Almost.
All right. Blended. No, I'm now on the screen on the, it won't, it just keeps shutting down the Zoom. It says unable to join the meeting. Your meeting cannot be transferred.
Can you hear me, Rabbi?
So I'm back into Zoom. I'm clicking on switch. Do we know why we're having trouble with, do you want me to reboot the machine? Hello?
Can you hear me, Rabbi?
I don't know. Now it's kind of.
Can you hear me, Rabbi?
If this doesn't work for whatever reason, then we will not use the screen in the room, and I'll have it projected a different way. All right, just going around. Any other good lunch?
I have chocolate.
The chocolate
It's on.
for lunch. Okay. Gabe, we can't hear you at all. Okay, so we're not going to use the owl. We're going to use my computer, and we're going to do this a slightly different way, but everyone will still be able to participate. Okay, so for the next 4 weeks, we're going to be exploring the work of Rabbi Michael Marmur. And we'll spend a little time today talking a little about who is still very much among the living, because Michael Marmur is going to be here as our scholar in residence November 7, 8, and 9. And we'll be here on Friday night. You can sign up for dinner to learn with him after services. You will also be able to come on Shabbat morning when he will be our scholar in residence to teach on that Saturday. And so we'll have the opportunity, and this way we'll all be very well prepared for Rabbi Marmur coming, because we'll have had a chance to learn a little bit about him and his thought. The book that, if you feel like buying a book, I would encourage you to buy is his most recent book that's called Living the Letters. It's published by Palmgrave Macmillan. And this is the book that he has been working on like his whole life. Yes.
That's one thing that it's freely available. A lot of different courses.
Yes, it's open source, so you don't need to buy the book. You can get it all online. You should buy the book because he wrote it, and you should pay for the author's material. I always encourage people, the reason why people write books is to share their knowledge and their wisdom, which is why he chose to make it an open source as opposed to a highly copyrighted source. Buy the book, okay? The author is Michael Marmur, okay, whom we're going to be studying. And so he has also written, which is sort of an expanded expression of his doctoral dissertation, which we'll talk about, a book about Abraham Joshua Heschel. We'll talk about that as well. Okay, so in our course for the next 4 weeks, which I'm blessed to share with you, and I'm excited to share with you, we're going to be exploring today a little bit about Michael Marmur, a little bit about sort of his thought and where his thought comes from. And then we're going to spend a little bit of time going through some of the pieces in, not the whole book, but pieces of what he's written, so that we'll have a chance to really understand his thinking and understand a lot of what he's developing. And then we can be ready to impress him when he comes to us with what we've already learned. Okay, does that sound like a good idea? Okay, so as we begin, I'm going to ask a question which is going to sort of seem like a question that's too big to answer, but I'm going to ask this question anyway. What is modern Jewish thought? What is modern Jewish philosophy, theology? What is it that is the question that modern Jewish philosophers are trying to answer?
Is it Aristotle?
No. I'm going to narrow it down, but what is the major question that when you hear modern Jewish thought, what is the question that modern Jewish thinkers are trying to answer?
What's the purpose of my life?
What is the future of the Jewish people? Excellent question. Excellent question. Good. If you're online, you can answer these questions too. You are as much around the table as anybody. Sue.
Yes, what is the meaning of my life?
Sue, I'm going to make you louder. But now I can't. You're still muted, Sue.
It shouldn't be.
What is the meaning of my life?
There we go. Hang on. Try again, Sue.
What is the meaning of my life?
What is the meaning of my life? Okay, we're going to have to use we'll do our best to try to hear each other. What is the meaning of my life is Sue's response. That is a great question. That's a piece of it. Not the biggest piece of it, but a piece of it for sure. Okay, good. Yes. How do you live a good Jewish life is the question. Okay? It's the question and the answer, right? Based on the fact that we live in modernity and we want to live a life as both a modern person and a Jewish person. Okay? One can choose to live life as a Jewish person, right? How does one live life as a Jewish person? Follow the halakha. It's very easy. You do what the Torah tells you to do. You do what the Talmud tells you to do. For, folks that have arrived at the Enlightenment, do what the Shulchan Aruch tells you to do. That's it. It ain't complicated. All right, if you're not sure what the Shulchan Aruch tells you to do, what do you do? The Shulchan Aruch is the last comprehensive compendium of Jewish law that was written by Joseph Caro in the 17th century and then amended and edited and added by Rabbi Moshe Isserles from Krakow. And what the two of them were able to do was to have a compendium of Jewish law that was authoritative both in the Sephardic and the Ashkenazic world. Was the last time they were able to do that, and that was almost 400 years ago, 300 years ago. What's that? All right, so we're going to get to that question. The question was, what do you do about secular Judaism? The fact is that prior to modernity, there was no such thing as secular Judaism. There was just Judaism. Right? You were either abiding by halakha or you were not abiding by halakha. It is a good thing to abide by halakha. Now, there's all kinds of questions about what is halakha in various different circumstances, but the question is you live by halakha, right? Now, in order to do that, prior to modernity, right, prior to the Enlightenment, when we talk about the Enlightenment, modernity, we're talking about call it sort of the beginning, really middle of the 18th century. Okay, we're talking about around that period historically, but prior to that, right, was it easy or hard for Jews to live a Jewish life? Well, it was hard because people like to kill us frequently, right, or expel us from various places where we lived and other things, but what made it somewhat easier? Yeah, you lived together in concentrated Jewish communities. So in feudal Europe, wherever it was that you lived where the Lord told you you had to live, right? And that's where the Jews lived, right? Anyone ever been to Barcelona, right? Where's the Jewish area in Barcelona? Jews Hill. That's actually what it's called in Barcelona, Jews Hill. Okay, in Venice, it's called Il Ghetto, okay? That was the Jewish section of Venice, and it was walled and locked. For whose benefit? The Jews, right? So that we could sleep at night and not worry if someone's going to be marauding through the Jewish neighborhood. You lock the door at night, right? But that's where Jews lived, okay? And if it was in a more rural setting, they might say the Jews get to live in this part of the fiefdom, right? Jews were allowed to live in certain places along the Pale of Settlement in Eastern Europe, right? And they either lived in urban centers like Lublin, Vilna, or they lived in rural centers or rural areas, which we might call the shtetl, right? And so Jews lived with other Jews. And so Jewish mores dictated what happened. And there were Jewish courts to navigate issues of interpersonal contact, right? And when there were questions between the Jewish community and the non-Jewish community, they had provisions for that as well. What happens with modernity? Well, there is some migration, right? In the world of ideas, why was the Enlightenment a crazy idea? Well, what did our good friend Thomas Jefferson, what did TJ write that encapsulated the ideas of the Enlightenment in our Declaration of Independence? We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. Right? It took them a while to figure out that men with dark skin and women too, right, should also be created equal. There were people who were working on that. Eventually that came to be understood as well, right? But the idea that all men are created equal was a revolutionary idea, which is why he had to write that this is a self-evident idea. No one has to tell people that it's a self-evident idea if it is actually self-evident. Because in 1776, that idea was still pretty new, right? The idea that there was an equality about people. And so if there's an equality about people, what does that mean for Jews? That must mean we're equal too. Who knew? Right? That was a brand new idea. So the idea of modernity itself said, hey, Jewish people don't need to be segregated from the rest of society. Jewish people will be invited to integrate into that society. Meaning they can go to our universities, they can join our craft guilds, they can interact in commerce and in the professions, they can leave the ghetto, and they can live like everybody else. Did Jews want to do this? Some. Not everybody, but some. There were some that said joining modernity was an evil thing. There are still Jews who say that's an evil thing. Anyone ever been to Brooklyn? Have you met a Satmar? Right? The Satmar Chassids don't want to know about modernity. They use modernity to the least necessary degree possible, right? For example, a Satmar Chassid will have a cell phone, but it won't be a smartphone. They use old flip phones because they don't like the internet. But they do like the idea that I can walk and talk, right? So they'll use, right? So they actually have what are called kosher phones. There are actually also kosher smartphones, right? Which wall off the internet except for certain accepted sites, right? Because they say, oh, I could use my phone to study while I'm on the subway instead of having to schlep a sefer, a book, right? So, but the idea is like there are whole sections of Jews that say, I don't have to worry about modern Jewish thought because I don't believe in modernity. Because I don't believe that we should be integrating with the larger culture. However, there were lots of Jews who said, this is what we've been waiting for. So the question that modern Jewish thinkers are trying to answer is, how do I marry these two ideas which may or may not blend well, which is modernity and Judaism? So modernity brings with it a whole bunch of other interesting ideas. So one of the ideas that modernity brings with it is this idea called secularism. What is secularism? A non-religious way of formulating a moral and ethical foundation for life. Okay? A belief system that is separate from religion. Okay? It isn't that secular people are highly immoral and unethical people. Many of them are. The question is, how do they formulate the moral and ethical code that guides their life? How does a religious person figure out what is the moral and ethical code that they follow? As a Jew, it's the Torah, the oral Torah and the written Torah, right? What the rabbis say the Torah is, the Shulchan Aruch, right? I follow halakha. How do I know what the right thing? I talked about it on Rosh Hashanah, right? How do you know what the right thing to do is? What does the Torah say I'm supposed to do in this situation? I'm walking along the street and I find a lost object. Do I pocket it and take it home and say, lucky me, or do I return it to its original owner? Why do I return it to the original owner? No. No. Why do I return it to its original owner? No.
It's in the Talmud.
Yes, Debbie, say it louder. Because the Torah says so. Because the Torah says, if you see your neighbor's sheep or ox gone astray, it's your responsibility to return that lost sheep or ox to your neighbor. And that's true with anything that's fallen. There is an entire tractate in the Talmud called Baba Metzia, which is, what do you do when you find lost stuff? It's thick. Okay? So, you modern people who are sitting around the table saying that the reason why you do this is because it's the right thing to do, it makes me feel good, it makes rational sense, whatever those things are lovely ideas, ain't Jewish. There was a guy named Immanuel Kant, okay, who was a seminal German thinker who created this idea that you could have ethics without religion. Up until that point, if you wanted to know what the ethical answer was to something, it had nothing to do with rationality, had nothing to do with reason, had nothing to do with what it felt like inside. It had to do with what the church said. And in our tradition, what the rabbi said, what the Torah says. And Kant came along and said, no, you can figure out what the right thing to do is without religion by applying what? Reason, logic, rationality. So he created this idea called the categorical imperative. How many of you have heard me talk about this before? Right? You can use this to impress your friends at cocktail parties, right? You know, the categorical imperative. The categorical imperative is a fancy way of saying, what if everybody did it? What if everybody did it? So I find a lost object. And I say to myself, what would the world be like if no one ever returned a lost object? If everyone took a lost object and brought it home with them and said, lucky me. How many of you have ever lost something that belonged to you that you wanted to get back? How many of you actually got it back? Lauren, what happened? So Lauren said that she had a very special bracelet. Let's go with the fact that it was deeply important to you. I'm giving you a great story, right? Whatever, doesn't even better, right? Lauren found it, lost a bracelet. Somebody found it, gave it in, and you got it back. And how'd you feel? Wonderful, right? Yes. Whoa. Fran lost a diamond earring in a hat shop. Wow. Right? And she got back her diamond earring. Right? So Some of us can think of times when we didn't get back our lost objects. I one time was flying to a friend's celebration in Kansas City, and I had my iPad and I had put it in the seat back, and I was in the van to the rental car, and I said, "Oh gosh." And I went back to the terminal. I said, "That airplane, seat 7F in the back, that's where my iPad is. Can someone please go get it?" And they were dawdling or whatever, and they said, no one found it. I go, "I'm telling you, it's there. I'm looking," because I had Find My Phone. Thank you, Apple, right? No one ever found it. I'm literally watching my iPad fly to Dallas, right? But I never got it back, right? So one way that you can figure out the ethics of returning a lost object is, well, I know how I'd feel if I got my thing back. And I think about what would the world look like if we could always rely on each other to help us when we had a mistake and we lost something. Logically, it is you should return a lost object. But that's a different ethic, right? We're now supplanting what religion teaches for our rational sensibilities. How many of you actually, and you're Jewish, right? Or if you're not Jewish, you are thinking about these things, rely much, much more on your own logic and reason to determine ethical actions than what Torah and tradition teach. The rest of y'all are lying. Okay. How many of you keep strict kosher? I can ask that at Lunch and Learn. Is that the reason you didn't bring your lunch? Because you were afraid to bring your BLT in here? Right? Yeah. Why don't you keep kosher? The Torah is very clear. The Talmud is extremely clear about what you're supposed to eat. Why don't you keep kosher? Because you're supplanting what the Torah says for modern sensibilities. I don't care that the Torah says do this, this, and this. Doesn't matter to me. I think it's not rational. I want to eat it. I like pepperoni pizza. I don't know, whatever your rationale is for deciding not to observe that piece of Judaism, right? I'm here just about every Friday night. Some of you are, some of you ain't. What are you doing on Friday night? What your conscience tells you you want to do on Friday night. Some of you are saying, I'm observing Shabbat. Some of you are saying, I'm going to dinner with friends. Some of you say, I'm catching a movie. I'm going to a show. Some of you say, I'm staying home watching TV. Some of you are going shopping, Costco. I don't know what you're doing, right? I know what some of you are doing because I see you on Friday night when you're here, right? But we make our choices, right? Most of us as moderns have decided that this is more authoritative than this. And so how do you have a Judaism when the Torah is no longer the only source of authority? That is the number one question that modern Jewish thinkers are trying to answer. And so the entirety, that's why I'm spending a half hour on this, is because the whole project of modern Jewish thought, the whole project of modern Jewish philosophy is, how do I have a foot in both worlds? How do I merge the world of Torah and tradition with the modern world that I'm unwilling to surrender? There's lots and lots and lots of thinkers that are trying to answer that question. And Rabbi Marmur is one of them. In addition to being a thinker, he is also a teacher. And so what I want to do is to take a look at some of the major influences on Rabbi Marmur from other thinkers who are trying to answer the same question. But I wanted to just pave that sort of foundation of what it is that we're going to be trying to explore in the next 4 weeks, because that's what modern Jewish thought is. How do I have an authentic, grounded, compelling Judaism and have a life in the modern world without surrender? Because if I say I'm only going to be modern, I've stopped being Jewish. If I'm only Jewish, I'm surrendering modernity. how do I merge those two things? Okay, Dan, and then, yeah.
Okay, you said earlier that following that being Jewish, is follow halacha, Shulchan Aruch, Torah. In that in modern Judaism, you follow the Torah, right? But if it's in the Torah, then that's the morality, that's the code of ethics. Well, you can't really follow the Torah 100%. A lot of it said in this thing.
Right, that's why I said follow the Shulchan Aruch, right? That compendium of Jewish law that is the most recent authoritative compendium of Jewish law. Right, so they tell you how do you live a Jewish life in the 17th century, right? And then there have been several hundred years of what are called responsa, right? Questions and answers that the rabbis have, case law that extend. So for example, right, can I use a microwave oven on Shabbat? Well, there wasn't a microwave oven in the 17th century. How do I know whether I can use it? Can I use electricity on Shabbat? What do I do in this situation, that situation? So there's hundreds and hundreds of years of case law, and there has yet to be another authoritative compendium of Jewish law. But most people say if you follow this rabbi, that's a kosher path. Okay? Yes. Mm-hmm.
It seems almost, I think, it's a non-Jew, right?
No, it's not that they don't see you as a non-Jew. They see the Judaism you practice as not authentic. It's a difference.
Yes. One. I don't know how.
Okay, well, you'll have more tools to explain. They won't agree with you, but you'll be able to explain it. Yeah. Because if you talk to our friends, so the interesting thing, and I don't want to go too much on this tangent, but Hasidic Judaism was an answer to the Shulchan Aruch do or die. Because the peasants that were living in these tiny little shtetlach in Eastern Europe that the Baal Shem Tov and his followers were dealing with were like Tevye the milkman, right? They didn't have the capacity to become so learned that they could follow. They couldn't follow the Shulchan Aruch to the letter of the law because their lives didn't allow for it. They couldn't learn to be that erudite. They couldn't practice that punctiliously. Life didn't allow for it. And what the Baal Shem Tov taught is you're supposed to follow the law, but it's really the spirit of the law that matters more than the letter of the law. And that was the debate between the Lithuanian Jews and the Hasidic Jews where they, would beat the crap out of each other. Literally, because they said you're not authentic. So Chabad is a derivative of the Hasidic line, different than the folks say on Montoya Circle who are more sort of Ashkenazi Litvish Jews, right? But as time has gone on, there's been sort of a merging there. But they both would agree you got to follow the Shulchan Aruch, right? And within the Hasidic movement itself, there are different aspects of how you approach modernity. You have the Satmars who say, don't even talk to me, and the Chabadniks that say, come for Shabbos. Let me introduce you to how beautiful a Torah life is, right? But so they're all living in various different ways. So for example, Chabad has one of the best Torah websites ever created. It's a fantastic encyclopedia of Jewish sources that they've deliberately spent millions and millions and millions and millions of dollars to build, right? Because they say we can use all this modern technology for the purposes of Keruv, of bringing people closer to Torah. But they're not surrendering.
They use not.
Right, but they're not using modern ideas.
No.
Right? They're not surrendering that to the world of ideas. Two more thoughts, and then I really want to go on. Susan first, and then, yeah.
Is that the interesting part about following the letter of law is that you're not supposed to write the Torah, okay? So What do I see in the Chabad parking lot? They have it blocked off, and then all the people are parking behind that and then walking from there, except for the people that live close to the block. So there's always exceptions. You know, so they can't even follow it.
Yes, Susan, last question, then we're gonna move on.
Given that we live under the laws of the Torah, will that mean that I'll get my scarf back that was obviously borrowed last night?
God willing. God willing, because look, everyone on this staff is trained that if you find something that doesn't belong, that we bring it to the security desk and we have a lost and found, and people come and claim things. We found, by the way, somebody found in the men's room on Rosh Hashanah a Cartier watch that was worth about $8,000, turned it in and got back to its original owner. Okay, so on with our story. Okay, so everyone online can see this, living the letters, yeah? Okay, good. Now I got to go back to what I'm doing. Perfect. Okay, so who is Michael Marmur? Good picture of him. He was born in 1962. He was raised in England. His father was Rabbi Dov Marmur. Okay, Rabbi Dov Marmur had kind of a fascinating life. He writes about the fact that he had kind of like 6 lives. He was born in Eastern Europe and then made his way during the period of the World War East. Ended up sort of living in parts of the former Soviet Union where he had fled, his family had fled to during the war, and eventually made his way to England. And for many, many, many years lived in Toronto, was the senior rabbi at Holy Blossom. Anybody, we have any Canadians here? In Toronto at Holy Blossom, where he was a well-known rabbi. But when Rabbi Marmur, Michael Marmur, his son was growing up, he grew up in England and then eventually went to Oxford, where he earned his degree in history. And then shortly after graduating from his bachelor's degree, made Aliyah. He served in the IDF as a military policeman. He says, I was the least important soldier ever to serve in the IDF. And was not sort of really well enamored. After his IDF service, he went back to the Hebrew University, where he got his master's in history, and then joined the Reform Movement's Israeli rabbinical program. So the Hebrew Union College has an American rabbinical program that produced your rabbis in various different generations, and Robert as well. And the Jerusalem campus has a program for Israelis that has a different track. Most of those who are studying for the rabbinate in Israel are either second career or trying to figure out how to make ends meet. You're much more of a pioneer. So it's hard to be a full-time student there. And the way that, first of all, obviously everything is taught in Hebrew, and the way they access the sources is different. And in any case, Rabbi Marmur was ordained in 1992 and then went to work for 6 years at a school in Haifa called the Leo Beck Education Center. The Leo Beck School in Haifa is a really, really interesting school. It was founded by a Reform rabbi where he wanted to create a really elite day school in Haifa that would be like a modern Jewish day school that would have Jewish subjects and secular subjects. So in Israel, there are 2 major sort of streams in the educational system. There's the secular public school system, and there's what's called the Dati school system. There are other kinds of charter schools also that you can create, but this was something a little bit different. So most Israelis had never been exposed to Reform Judaism, their families had never been exposed to Reform Judaism. So why would somebody want to send their kid to the Leo Beck School where they're going to learn Judaism during their high school experience? Now there's also a grade school attached to it. It was originally just a high school. Now it's a more, why would they go there? Well, why is 40% of the enrollment at St. Andrew's School, Episcopal School in Boca Raton, Jewish? Because it's a really good school. It's a really, really good school. So people go to school there and they end up getting their Judaism, not because they went there for there. Obviously, there's some people who do that, very rare. Most of them go there in spite of the Judaism because it's a really, really fine high school. And Rabbi Marmur was the rabbi and director of that school for a long time, and then went back to Hebrew University and earned his PhD in modern Jewish thought in 2006. And shortly after that, joined the faculty of Hebrew Union College in Jerusalem and taught not only in the Israeli rabbinic program, but all of the American rabbinic students spend their first year at the Jerusalem campus. And he ended up becoming the dean of that campus shortly after joining the faculty, and then became the provost of the entirety of the Hebrew Union College. It's 4 campuses in Cincinnati, New York, Los Angeles, and Jerusalem, up until 2018, when he decided he wanted to devote his energies at this stage in his career to full-time study and teaching. He also has another passion, which is human rights work, and he was the chair of an organization in Israel called Rabbis for Human Rights. And I'm going to explain a little bit about who are the 2 major influences on his life that help formulate a little bit of how he looks at Judaism, and also formulates a little bit about how he has oriented his own Jewish life. So his first major influence was Eugene Borowitz. Eugene Borowitz, without going into too much, was probably the most important Reform Jewish thinker of the 20th century. Dr. Borowitz went to school and eventually went to the Hebrew Union College. He was on Hebrew Union College's basketball team. Back in the day, HUC in Cincinnati had a basketball team. He was on the basketball team. And then eventually did doctoral work towards an academic doctorate. Eventually didn't finish that doctorate. He did his coursework, didn't write his dissertation. He went to Columbia, got his doctorate in education from Columbia's Teachers College, and then joined the faculty of the Hebrew Union College, where he was one of the really most important thinkers in Reform Judaism of the 20th century. In 1976, he was primarily the author of what was called the Centenary Perspective. In 1976, the Reform Movement, CCAR, put out a new platform of what is it that we Reform Jews believe. He was the author of that platform in 1976, wrote a whole series of books in which he tried to sort of articulate his ideas about modern Jewish theology. But his most important book, and the one that people really look to understand the corpus of Dr. Borowitz's thinking, is called Renewing the Covenant, in which he articulates an idea called covenant theology. All right, so let's unpack that word. When you hear the word covenant, what does that mean? What do you hear when you hear the word covenant? Yeah. Yeah, right? So as Jews, we say we are parties to a covenant, an eternal agreement, right? That began at Sinai and extends through today. When do you join the covenant? Right? For a boy, when you're 8 days old, because the bris does not mean circumcision. The word bris or brit means covenant, right? So the sign of the covenant for a boy may be the circumcision, but the ceremony is not about the circumcision. I remember I had to try to explain this to my Catholic brother-in-law. He says, I don't understand why Jews have a surgery party for their boys. And I had to explain to my Catholic brother-in-law that this isn't a surgery party, because the surgery is actually ancillary to what's happening. What's the more important thing that's happening besides, when the baby may not and others around may be not convinced of this, but what is the most important part of a bris ceremony? The naming, right? The naming. When that child is officially said, in the covenant of Israel, you will now be known as Shmuel Yaakov, or whatever name you give this little child, right? For a girl, it's within those first week or weeks of life when the father comes to the synagogue and announces the name of their baby girl, right? But we don't join the covenant by volition, right? We join the covenant as a birthright. There are those who join the covenant by volition, and who are they? Converts, Jews by choice, right? But what's interesting is when a Jew by choice joins the covenant, they get new parents. They don't surrender, obviously, their old parents, but who are their new parents? Abraham and Sarah, right? When you attach a new limb to the tree of Jewish life, the limb is not attached to the end of a branch, it's attached to the trunk. Right? Grafted right on there. So, covenant is the agreement that we have that we're going to live by Torah and tradition. However, we all know that as moderns, we choose with the freedom that we have whether and how to live in that covenant. Because what is the hallmark of modern thinking? The idea that morality and ethical conduct is not rooted outside of a person, it's rooted inside a person, right? So if I'm walking along and I see a lost object, and I say to myself, what does the Torah tell me to do now? Here's a fancy word, again, that you can use at cocktail parties to impress your friends, right? That is a heteronymous choice. Isn't it fun to have a philosophy and religion degree? You can use these big words. Heteronymous. What does heteronymous mean? Not a hippopotamus, a heteronymous. Heteronymous means a decision whose authority is located outside the self. That the authority to which I answer is located outside of myself. In this case, Torah and tradition. I'm giving myself, my will, over to Torah and tradition. You hear this in the Pirkei Avot, right? Where the rabbis say, make God's will your will, so God will make your will God's will. In other words, get rid of yourself and let God sit in the driver's seat. Let the Torah be your map. It isn't where you think you want to go. What is it called when you say, no, the authority for my ethical and moral conduct is in here? We call that autonomy. An autonomous decision is one where I decide for myself as an individual what I will do, which is rooted in human freedom, right? So the big gift that modernity gave to the world was the notion of autonomy. The idea that every human being should have the right and dignity to live as they choose. The greatest curse that modernity gave to the world was that every human being should decide for themselves what it is they will choose to do. Why is that both a blessing and a curse? Yeah. Ideas. Yeah.
Because now you have a protest, you have a right to your religion, but some of that religion worships.
Right? Because with autonomy, I can walk away. Right? What else? Yeah.
morality, behavior, it may not fit into the constructs of the community that you are living within, and it doesn't make community.
It doesn't make community work, right? Because what happens if every person has the freedom to redefine what Judaism is? Then you kind of lose what Judaism is, right? Yeah, Alan. Modernity is a loss of, it doesn't have to be, but that's one of the plagues, because if I live solely in a Jewish context, I will live a very thick Jewish life, right? Because everything about my life will be defined by Jewish law, Jewish culture, Jewish, right? If I can exit that world for some part of my life, naturally, I'm going to have to dilute my Judaism, because there's going to be these other pieces of my life that I'm adding. The secular world or other culture, opera, Broadway, Matisse, right? Other things that are not part of Jewish culture, but may very well enrich my life. But I only get a certain number of hours to be awake during a day. I only get to live on the planet for a certain number of years. I can only be in one place at a time. So if I'm not going to be in the synagogue, and I'm going to be in an art museum, or I'm going to be in a theater, or I'm going to be on a sports field or in a sports stadium, or I'm going to be in a university, whatever it is I'm doing that's not in the Jewish world is diluting the time I could be in the Jewish world. And that makes for challenges. So what Borowitz taught, everyone online is still following me? Yeah? You can eat your lunch. It's all right. No one's going to see. What Borowitz said is that the greatest success that modernity's given us is this idea of the autonomy of the individual, that everybody should be free to live their life. We hold these proofs to be self-evident, that all are created equal and endowed by their creator with the inalienable right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Right? As Americans, get out of my way. Right? Let me live my life. So the curse of that is that we start to worship the individual. And the individual begins to become a god. So Borowitz writes the following. Sometimes, yeah. Liberal religion, like Reform Judaism, which had as good as deified the self. Think of what that means. I've not only sort of said the autonomous self is a good thing, I've said the autonomous self is God. Because I'm giving the self the authority to determine what's good and what isn't. And if I take that authority and give it to an individual, I've dethroned the Holy One. I'm sorry. Right, this is the challenge, right? He says, ascribing to human consciousness or ethics a certainty it denied to God. In other words, I put more stock in rationality and in reason than I do in Torah. By doing this, it lost much of its credibility as the self became discredited as its own savior. What is it that happened in history that discredited humanity as its own savior? The Holocaust. Because you had the seat of rationality, which was Germany. The smartest, most rational philosophers and scientists were all German. Can anyone name one? Albert Einstein. Name another. Immanuel Kant. Wittgenstein. All of the great thinkers, mathematicians, scientists were all German. It was the seat of rationality. And somehow they figured out that it was rational to kill as many Jewish people as they could find, including babies. So we learned in the middle part of the 20th century that there is only so much stock we can put in logic and reason. which gave birth to a new idea that we call postmodernity, which is kind of the area that we're living in now. And Borowitz was the first of the postmodern thinkers who said, well, maybe we put too much stock in logic and reason. Maybe logic and reason isn't as good as we thought it was, because human beings, A, can use logic and reason to think of all kinds of things that are morally awful, and B, most human beings are not particularly logical or reasonable. Has anyone been in a relationship with one? Has anybody ever raised adolescent children? Right? Not exactly logical or reasonable people, right? So Borowitz writes, conscious that we deserved and needed far more positive guidance than we had received from liberal humanism, many people became part of that broad movement of postmodern spirituality that has sought to reclaim a source of human meaning beyond the self. In other words, I know I need meaning. I know I need spirituality. I'm not willing to completely surrender my capacity for logic and reason, but I'm aware that my capacity for logic and reason has limits. So there may be sources of wisdom and pathways to spirituality that are outside of myself that I need to incorporate into my life from an autonomous place where I choose it. Which is sort of kind of like why we're all, what am I doing on Wednesday at noon? I'm going to make it my business to be either online or at temple to take this class. Why? Because I'm curious. I can't figure it all out on my own. This is why we need Torah. This is why we need tradition. This is why we need all these other things, right? But we're choosing these things from a place of autonomous authority. No one is making us do this, right? This is the argument that I have with, parents all the time. What do I do, Rabbi? After her bat mitzvah, she doesn't want to continue. And I say, well, why on earth is it a choice? She didn't want to do her bat mitzvah either. But you made her do that. I guarantee you, if you offer her the chance never to go to algebra, she'll never go to algebra, right? So I know the math teacher over here is like, really? Can you imagine, right? Or English class in my daughter's case, right? Why do I need this? I don't want to do this, right? So why would we say to a 14-year-old, you can choose whether you have a Jewish education? Because we're moderns. And we think that she should have a choice. The Rabbi, what happens if we force them? Well, they might get an education if you force them. They might come to realize things that they didn't know they needed to know. Right? But because we're so locked into this idea of autonomy as the principal value, we think if you deny a child autonomy, that it will imperil them. And this is the balance that we're trying to figure out. So Borowitz says the biggest challenge that we face, and he's writing in the 1970s, 80s here. He taught into the 2000s, but his book is sort of crystallized in the late 70s, 80s. The biggest challenge determining what is it where as Jews we are bound to do? What is our Jewish obligation? What is our Jewish duty? In other words, yes, I have autonomy, but there are things that as an autonomous person, I know I am duty bound to do. So, for example, I'm on a subway or a train, and I see someone who looks unsteady, infirm, using an assisted device to walk, and I'm sitting, and this person isn't. What do? You get up, and you say, would you like to sit? Can I help you? Why do you do that? Because you feel a duty, an ethical duty, to assist someone who's infirm, to help the vulnerable. Right? Why is it that so many people decided when the United States entered World War II to volunteer to join the army? because they felt they had an obligation, a duty to fight for the freedoms that the United States ostensibly stood for, even if they weren't actually enacting it in practice with everyone everywhere. Similarly, right? Does anybody know the percentage of people who responded to the call up on October the 8th in Israel? 140%. Now, wait a minute. How can you have 140% call up? So there were some people that literally flew from overseas who says, I'm not even Israeli, but I want to help. But you had dozens and dozens, hundreds, thousands of people who were not called to reserve duty, who said, I'm coming anyway. Our bus driver, when we were on one of our trips, his name is Avram, was a tank driver for many, many, many years in the Army and the reserves. And so on October the 7th, he went down to his unit and they said, Avram, you're 50 years old. We don't go home. And he said, no, because in my 32 years of driving this friggin' tank, I've learned things that these boys need to know. Let me show them everything I know so they don't kill themselves. He wasn't called, he wasn't asked. But he said, I had a duty to ensure that whoever was going to drive a tank into Gaza had the best wisdom, experience, tactical capacity, and dexterity that I could possibly teach them. So how would you define the word duty? Oh, we're almost done. We're going to conclude with this.
Something you have to do.
Something you have to do. But as an autonomous person, we'll end with this, and we'll pick up with this and more happy stuff next week. A duty can be either a heteronymous duty or it can be an autonomous duty, right? So a heteronymous duty is a duty where an outside force says you have to do this. We might call that the law, right? Or conscription. You have to serve. You have to go. An autonomous duty is one that says, well, I don't have to, but I have to. Because the compulsion comes from within. And so part of what we're going to explore with Borowitz and also with Heschel and with what Michael Marmur is teaching is, how do we figure out what are our Jewish duties? Those things as an autonomous person that we accept upon ourselves as our Jewish duties, obligations, maybe even compulsions, and how do we decide from an autonomous place what those are and what they shouldn't be? Okay? Last thoughts or questions? We're having fun? Okay, I'm having fun. And we wish everybody a really good week.
Thank you.
What's that?
Movement.
This is the entire project of Reform Judaism. This is what Reform Judaism is trying to figure out.
Last year, this year, last.
When, oh, in the World Zionist Congress elections?
Yes.
I'll get to that in a minute. Anybody else have any other questions about what we talked about? All right, have a great day. Bye, everybody. Steve, say hi to Sue.